struggle was not read. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, and Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, and Morocco to Madagascar.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the AZAPO Online Political Education Series. And today we are concluding on our September Biko month, and this being the 43rd anniversary of the brutal murder and martyrdom of Bantu Steve Biko. As you would know, he died on the 12th of September 1977. And today we are talking about the events from the date of his death until the date of his burial. That was on the 25th of September 1977. I am here with the former Deputy President of the Black People's Convention, one of the stalwarts of the Black Consciousness Movement, Comrade Rev Drake Tshenkeng. He was one of the responsible comrades in preparation for the funeral of Bantu Stephen Biko. Welcome, Reverend Tshenkeng.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve. I can hear me.
Now I can hear you. Thank you very much. And it's always great to have people like you on this platform. I have been engaging for the whole month of September with the stalwarts and comrades of Biko and his peers, people who worked and lived with him and during his time, as we were celebrating, and commemorating the life and times of Bantu Stephen Biko. And it was great and important for us to engage with some of you and just to reflect on the life he lived, reflect on the ideas, he espoused, and reflect on the contribution that he made to the advancement of the Azanian revolution. And he and all of you contributed tremendously to where we are as a country, and it is important to reflect back. And I suppose today we will be going back to that day, that fateful day on the 12th of September 1977, when you heard that Biko is no more. It is important just to get an understanding and a feeling of how some of you felt and how you reacted as the leadership of the BBC, and how the country felt. And, as you were beginning, the motions towards, the preparation of laying to rest this gallant fighter of our revolution, what were the processes, what was unfolding, what was the thinking behind the preparation, this being the, I suppose, the first mass funeral in this country. How did you go about preparing for it under those telling conditions? And we understand that most of, the people who were engaged in struggle at the time couldn't even make the funeral, and there were a lot of roadblocks that were made along the way to block people from attending Biko's funeral. And yet, despite all of the efforts by the system, you managed to organize one of the biggest, if not the biggest, send-offs of Bantu Biko, with Victoria Grounds full to capacity. So it would be great to listen to you reflect on that period of time, and reflect on the person of Biko and the life he lived, and just reflect on who he was how you understood him to be. Because once he was no more, I suppose it began to dawn that, you know, a Kalan fighter has moved on, and it was now time to reflect on the life and times that he lived with you, and Tshenkeng. Okay.
Thank you. That is pure. And greetings to you people, comrades in Limpopo. May I thank you also for giving me this opportunity of sharing with you some things about Steve Biko. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to be invited by you, by the branch of AZAPO, which I hold in great esteem. To you, Rescue, and to Delta, thank you very much for communicating with us. We've been speaking through phone calls, but I hope one day we'll be able to meet. But God willing, I'm sure we will. Yeah, it's,
Most definitely. Mm.
yeah, undoubtedly, the death of Biko caught us unawares, and to me particular, I mean, in my case, someone to whom Biko was a personal friend, known him for a very long time. And when I heard that he has died or been brutally killed by the security police, it was shattering, it was hurting, and I became angry. And that is perhaps also not only does not reflect on my own feelings, but it reflects also on the feelings of other members who were around, who knew Biko. For indeed, in the office that day of the 12th, there was silence. We couldn't even say anything. But the way we were shattered, the way we were shocked, we didn't expect this thing to happen. We didn't expect the security police of the South African police to go to that extent of murdering Biko. But as it happened, we said to ourselves, they have murdered him, but they have not destroyed us, nor destroyed Biko's spirit and ideas. The spirit and his ideas will live on. And that's how we, shattered as we were, for sometimes we were left unable to do anything. But then it dawned on us that we need to pull ourselves up and see how best we can prepare for this great giant of South Africa, this man of the people, this man of the soil called Biko. Because indeed, Steve was greater than life. He, for us, was not only, for me in particular, was not only my esteemed leader, but was a personal friend, as I said. And we got in Johannesburg, where we prepared as best as we can for the funeral. Not much, we couldn't do much as people did in King Williamstown, but we said perhaps the best thing for us to do around Johannesburg in preparing is to sound out the reactions of the people. And of course, people, not only BPC members, but the general public were hurt, and they felt angry at the time. They all knew that indeed Steve did not commit, go on a hunger strike or commit anything to take away his life. That Steve was killed, he was brutally murdered. And we also said to ourselves as BPC, perhaps the best thing we can do here in Johannesburg or there in Johannesburg at the time is to see how best we can arrange some form of transport to enable people to attend the funeral. That was a decision that we came to without, as you may understand, we were a poor organization, didn't have the funds, we didn't have the money for the transport. But we just went ahead, made an advert or announced that people who wish to travel to King Williamstown for the funeral should submit their names to our office, to Mema Gauta Molefe at that time was running the office with the Secretary General, Tizamba Zibuko. And amazingly, what we did not expect is the number of people at the end who wanted to go to King Williamstown for the funeral. But as you know, people, most of them were unable to afford or even contribute towards the costs for the transport. So it was left to us and it became a headache, a terrible one. What are we going to do? We have so many people, and as we counted the numbers who registered, they were people who could fill in about more than 10 buses, full buses for themselves. If a bus takes, say, 65 people. So we scratched our heads, what are we going to do? One, we have these people who are interested in going to King Williamstown to pay their last respect to Steve. Two, we do not have the money. So the best thing was to solicit some funds from friends. And fortunately, we got friends in the Christian Institute at the time, which was, of course, run by Bayes Norde, Brian. Yes, Bayes Norde, it was Mason and Brian. And we had also one of our members who was Reverend Castro Mayatula, being part of that institute. So they were kind enough and generous enough to help us with the funds. And even today, one feels indebted to their generosity. For without them, we couldn't have managed what we did at the time. And that enabled us, with the funds, enabled us to book and rent buses for the journey to King Williamstown. We first tried to get the big company. I think the time it was Patco, but Patco refused point blank when we told them we were going to King Williamstown for the funeral of Biko. They refused. So my friend and I, Jaras, Kokong, Tatemputse, we scratched our heads again and said, perhaps the best thing is to go around Soweto to find private buses. And we did drive around Soweto, managed to find private buses who charged us. I mean, we were able to afford it. And we were ready, indeed, after a long struggle, to carry people with these buses to King Williamstown. We discussed when we're going to leave, from where, and then communicated that to the people that on such and such a day, we are going to be leaving for King Williamstown for the funeral. And we arranged the date, which was the 23rd of September, 1977. And we said the best place for us to congregate was the YWCA, Young Women's Christian Association facilities or hall in Dube. And that, when the day came, we all went there in the evening. It was the evening. It was a bit dark. And the buses were lined up to collect or for people to board. And you know, there was excitement that at least we are going to Biko's funeral. And I could see and the atmosphere of people that they were extremely glad that they offered this particular chance for them also to go and mourn for Steve and bury him. And whilst we were busy helping people to board buses, and we had quite a number of buses we managed with the Butzing and some other people, we had about 15 private-owned buses, just to show the number of people who wanted to go and were keen. And that number of people were mailing around, they were around the YWCA facilities and just waiting to board. So people were boarding, and whilst people were boarding, all of a sudden, it was such a sudden and shocking, we heard a shattering of glass. We didn't know where the glass came from. But when we looked around, we saw the police in uniform, heavily armed, advancing and started beating up people, what you call shattering windows of the buses. It was such a confusion and shock that there was nothing else could do. People just ran away or ran helter-skelter for their lives. And there was no one left actually. We all ran, even us, ran into the darkness, not knowing where we are going to end up. But as long as we were away from danger. And some of us found ourselves congregating at Tizama Zibuko's brother's house, that is Sizwe. You know, just saying to ourselves, how dare they do this kind of thing to us? How cruel these police are. And we could see that by all means, they didn't want anyone to attend to the funeral. And amongst us at the time, and there was the mother, Leah Tutu, who also came there with the intention of boarding the bus and traveled to King Williamstown when she was also found at Sizwe's place. So we didn't know what to do next because all people had scattered. And there we are. Also, the buses also left because the bus drivers now became afraid. Some people left their cars. I remember Baba Jordan, who drove my car that night, actually left it there and also ran away. We had to collect it in the morning. That is how terrible it was that night at the WCA, the Friday night. But as fate would have it, we said, and I said to Tiza, let's see what we can do. We must, at least the two of us, must go to King Williamstown and pay our last respect to Tiza, knowing, no, to Steve, knowing fully well that all our other comrades couldn't make it. So Tiza and myself managed to book plane tickets to East London the following day. It was lucky for us. So we traveled to Tiza by plane, which was smooth. There was no roadblocks, of course, up there. And we understood that there are roadblocks all over the country. But the message we got was that there was one bus from Pretoria that managed to dodge the roadblocks because these people in this bus disguised themselves as congregants of the Zionist church, and they were singing loudly. And they were led by one robust BBC member called Kanakana, who was a lovable fellow. He was robust, but lovable. And, we don't know how far they managed to dodge, because according to the information that we received was that roadblocks were all over the country. But then Tiza and myself managed to get to East London, and whilst when we arrived, we were trying to get a taxi or something to Ginsberg. Fortunately for us, we came across and met an old friend from the days of SASO, Dr. Gula, G's Gula, who was a very committed member of the Black consciousness also. And G's, of course, was one during SASO time when we have Goombas, that he will take a well-known song, change the words and start to sing, or the hymn or hymns. But Jesus had that gift of changing songs and putting in the words that were relevant to our struggle. So Dr. Gies had rented a car, and he was willing for us to ride along with him. So we traveled together to Ginsberg. We got to Ginsberg in the evening. And already when we arrived, there were quite a number of people. I mean, it was masses of people who were able to dodge all those roadblocks and police trying to turn people back. But some people did manage, that is outside, people from Ginsberg and King Williamstown. We tried to see Steve's wife, Ntsike, and mother, to offer our condolences. But unfortunately, the way it was full, it was impossible to do that. And we said to ourselves, no, okay, let's see what we can do. We helped with the preparations, and when we arrived at the hall there we were met by BBC President Tlaku Ratsidi and the late Tom Mantata, who were busy helping with the preparations. So the preparations were on that evening. And other people at the house were having the night vigil, where quite a number of people were able to attend. So we slept quite late that night. We were tired from traveling, but we persevered, kept on. And we had to, with the next morning, We prepared for the funeral and joined the morning. We joined the funeral. There was a procession, and I mean, the way it was packed, the way the people, you wouldn't say that people were blocked and by the police from coming to bury Biko. And I was just saying to myself, I wonder how many people would have it been if there were no roadblocks, because the crowd that was there just showed that with so many people being turned back and blocked, that crowd would have been more than it was. It was even difficult to estimate. I know that some people were estimating the crowd as between 20 and 50,000 possible. The way there were masses and there were masses and masses of people. Sometimes you couldn't move. I mean, you had to push your way through in order to reach your destination. But, after the morning service, which was prayer service, to take the corpse to the main service, the Steve's coffin was laid on, it was an oxen cart, which one would say that it's a sign of respect for who Steve was, because we knew that oxen cart was used for the burial of kings and monarchs. But here was Steve, who, a son of the soil, also carried by an oxen cart or carriage. And the procession was, quite slow. The atmosphere was tense, very, very, very tense. Anything could have happened. People were so angry. People were singing the revolutionary songs with clenched fists in defiance against the apartheid regime. The atmosphere was really tense. It was fiery, in other sense. And then we moved to the main service, but when we reached town, there we were again confronted by the police. Of course, they didn't stop us, but they were all over, heavily armed also. And you looked around King Williamstown at the time, there was no white face to be seen along the road, the houses. And one guessed that the whites in the town, either they left town or they locked themselves in their houses. The way, you were in town, you couldn't see the whites. The whites who were those who came for the funeral, and the whites we saw were the police. So we managed to get to the site for the main service, which was a recom mass. That is, a celebration of the last rites for a person, and which were conducted by who is now the emeritus Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It was a solemn and dignified service. Tutu led the service and preached a very powerful sermon he gave that day. And during the service, of course, Bishop Tutu asked me to read the gospel, which he chose, and I read the gospel. And as I said, it was solemn, and very dignified. And when I looked around where the family was sitting, I could see the sadness on Nsiko's face. Sadness which symbolizes the feeling of the people around her, because we are sad, we're in mourning, but with a spirit of, yes, we are mourning, but we are not defeated. And as people, people were still defiant and still angry about what happened to Steve. So service continued, and it was quite a long service. Usually takes about, I think, took about 2 hours, and duty concluded. And then after tutu, there were then messages, and there were speeches. Now, Tlaku, that's Kenny Rachidi, delivered the eulogy on behalf of the Black People's Convention, an eulogy which I believe was well received. His thrust, his message, was actually that Steve may be dead, but his spirit lives forever. And that's the message that captured also the atmosphere and the feelings of people who were at the funeral. It was unfortunate that not many PPC members, especially from Johannesburg and other places, couldn't make it. But we had a good number of PPC members who around King Williamstown and those near who managed to escape roadblocks. So the speeches continued for some time. And among we had also at the funeral, we had a number of dignitaries actually. I believe that even Helen Sussman was there, the one from the Progressive Party. And the American consul from Durban was there. So you can just see how great this man was, the one who we're burying, how respected Steve was not only among us, but among the general public because of who he was. He was Steve Biko who feared nothing. When everything ended, we buried Steve with the same dignity. We bid our last farewell to him. His great spirit still continued, although his physique was buried. He was a man who was son of the soil, so he returned to the soil. And, we said to ourselves, yes, they killed him, but they will never kill the Black Consciousness movement, because Steve has laid the foundation for this movement. He was the person who was so committed to the liberation of his people and this country. Steve did all this with no expectation of any form of reward. But here was a man who was even prepared to give his own life for the sake of his brothers and sisters. And here was a man who, in his own words, dreamed of a better country, of a better South Africa. And perhaps if I quote some of these words that actually lives in me whenever I think about our situation in South Africa. Steve, I think of these words of Steve, and when he said, In one of his writings, that is writing to the quest for true humanity, I want to quote Steve when he concludes that piece of writing, for he said, we need to draw, Steve said, we have set out on a quest for true humanity. And somewhere in the distant horizon, we can see the glittering prize. Let us march forth with courage and determination, drawing strength from our common plight and our brotherhood. In time, we shall be in a position to bestow upon South Africa the greatest gift possible, a more human face. Those words of Steve rings true and rings in my mind when I think about our own situations, how defaced this human face is, a human face Steve dreamt of, hoped for, a human face that Steve wanted to bequeath to this country. I say to myself, we lack even today, as a democratic country, as a liberated country, we lack this human face. It is still defaced because of the situation that we find ourselves in. For example, there is rampant poverty, a poverty that is man-made, a poverty that visits the blacks more than anybody else. We are faced with corruption, unspeakable corruption, greed. We are faced by violence against women and children. We're also faced by rampant crime in our country, thieving, looting, all these unspeakable things shows that our human face that Steve longed for has been effaced. And I always keep these words of Steve in my mind and pray that one day indeed, we may bring back this human face. This human face may be reborn in us and become a people worthy to be called the people of South Africa. That the Ubuntu that we speak about should not only be a lip service, but it should be in action. Whatever we do to our brother and sister to show our care. And on those words, may I say, Steve Biko's spirit lives. And let it continue to live amongst us, to encourage us, to become more determined, so that we are able together to plant a human face in this, our beloved country, South Africa. I thank you.
Se synd på
Thank you very much, and Drake Tshenkeng, for your reflections, and it was great. And I wish to again welcome back all our viewers and participants from a number of. I see we have connections from Sierra Leone, from the United Kingdom, from Nigeria. I see people from Ethiopia, the United States, and the DRC. I see you from Bangladesh and Zambia, and welcome to this platform. It was indeed Biko who said you are either alive and proud or you are dead. And when you are dead, you can't care anyway. And your method of death can itself be a politicizing thing. And it was, quite telling that he foresaw and foretold, how politicizing his death would be. To the nation of Tanzania, to Black people. And the fact that a number of people managed to find themselves traveling towards Ginsberg to pay their last respects and bury him without being supported, and and the droves and numbers of others who could not make it to Ginsberg on that 25th day of September 1977 is quite telling. And your estimate of about 50,000 people making it is quite astronomical, a number, considering the times that Biko was buried at. It was a time of suppression. It was a time of sacrifice. A lot of you had to sacrifice yourselves in order to be able to bury this son of the soil and, bring back his soul back to our people. And thanks for your reflections. And I don't know what you then make of the fact that on the 19th of October, a couple of days later, after Biko was martyred, the entirety of the Black consciousness movement was banned. Was it perhaps the fear of Biko that brought the system to be so afraid of the contribution and the voice of the Black consciousness movement that they decided to destroy it in the manner in which they did? I don't know, how was the reflection and the reception by the international community towards Biko's death? Was the message so loud that they feared that the country could be liberated a day later?
Yeah, the international message was people they were shocked. So that's why we had this Biko song by Gabriel to show that people, they were hurt by, it's something that even those who were supporting the apartheid, this took them by surprise, and they thought that apartheid is not that bad. But what happened to Biko showed them the brutality of the ideology of apartheid. The 19th of September, bannings and detentions, one can only deduce that, Steve's support, especially among the people, but only those who went to his funeral. His support sort of exacerbated the fear of the apartheid regime that here, this Black Consciousness movement is a danger to society and a danger to government. Because, to lovable that to start with, when the whole movement started, it was received with open arms by those in government at the time. They thought that, this is exactly what they mean and want to do with the so-called Bantustan ideologies and so forth. And here are people who are promulgating and promulgating and actually preaching a message of Black inclusivity. And it was gospel for them. And here it changed. And they could see that there's real danger from this message. And after what happened to Steve and what Steve lived for, and the reception that this message received among the people, as I said, exacerbated the fear of the regime to say, let us get rid of all these Black consciousness movements and their leaders. And so the 19 October 77 happened, just, to try and silence and eradicate any form or any sense of Black consciousness among people, to put fear into people's heart, to scare them off. I think that's how perhaps the government perceived it at the time, that once they've done it, they have destroyed the movement, they've destroyed the philosophy of Black consciousness.
Thanks, Narrated Tshenkeng. I see earlier on you did mention that you worked very hard in mobilizing people towards Ginsberg along with Narrated Tshenkeng, and I see he's here on the line and may want to say a thing or two. Comrade Tshenkeng.
Thank you, Comrade Simpiwe. Comrade Drake has given a very good summary of what actually happened. I would like to get back to a point that he raised about our reaction in the office when we learned of the murder of Steve. Surprisingly, that morning we were talking about Steve Biko and his way of life, if one were to put it that way. We were actually laughing when we were talking about him. I remember going to the gents, and as I left the office, I was laughing boisterously. On my return, I realized that everybody was just solemn, and I asked, what's happening? They said, we've just received the news that they have killed Biko. Our immediate reaction was that we should get hold of our attorney so that he gets in touch with the prison authorities or whoever was responsible and tell them that no post-mortem on Steve Biko should be conducted without a pathologist appointed by the family. Indeed, when Shan Chetty phoned the authorities, they had started on the postmortem, and he instructed them to stop it immediately, which they did. We managed to get to Shan the following day. I was in the company of Malusi Umlwang. Shan Chetty was shaking. And all he said was, this time we've got them. We all thought that we were going to pin them down, that this was the last heinous act that they had done to our people. But we know what the result was. In the end, that magistrate prince held no one responsible for Steve's death. When we were gathered at the YWCA, reading out those names so that people could get to their buses, the attack from these people came. You know, when you at times explain it to people that we lived under a savagely repressive regime, they find it hard to believe, but that is so. I was on the stage looking at what was happening, and I watched a man as old as Manase Moerane, who was the editor of The World, escape from the hall through the window of the YWCA. I later met a receptionist from the Christian Institute, Belinda Palmer. Just asked her how she was there was the following day and where she had put up. She said, I had no alternative. I got into this yard. The nearest place that I could seek refuge in was where the owners of the house kept their code. She opened the lid, slid inside, and stayed there until the following morning. The sad thing is, a lot of the people who had gathered at the YWCA were actually detained by the police that Saturday and were subsequently charged under the Writers' Assemblies Act. They appeared in the Protea Magistrates Court on Monday, the Monday following the funeral. We were able to raise enough money for their bail. There were many. They made their appearance. The magistrate determined what the bail would be. So we had to rush to the office of the clerk to pay bail for them. But there were so many that at the time that they had to knock off, they had not issued all receipts for the banned people. Their chief then came, cancelled those people that had had not been served, and just warned them that they should appear in court at the determined date. The people from Pretoria that Drake talked about, I think, traveled as far as Kroonstad. They were turned back. When they recognized or realized that the preacher or the priest in the bus was Kanakana Matsena, they were incensed. And when they got to Pretoria, they took him to their offices and did a very heinous thing to him. They heated an iron rod and slit it down his posterior. That's what they did. It is not only the buses that were stopped, but at the time of Biko's funeral, South Africa had a problem with petrol. A lot of our people were prepared to drive down, but then to drive down, because at that time the speed limit was, I think, 80 kilometers per hour to preserve fuel, they had to get permission from magistrates in their various magisterial districts. These people were turned down. I remember a comrade, Thabo Sokela, who went there so that he could drive down after work on Friday, was bluntly told by the magistrate that he approached to give him that permit so that he could buy petrol on his way to King Williamstown. After he had asked him where he was going, he said in his face, "Do you think I'm mad to give you a permit to travel to that funeral? Get out of my office, you're not getting that permit." Now, those are the kinds of savages that we dealt with. Very callous, to whom death of a human being meant nothing. In fact, they rejoiced in it. That's why Kruger could say, "His death laat my koud, leaves me cold." I should say that in addition to the CI Drake, the late comrade Abubakar Aspat raised a substantial amount of money from his community, and it assisted in securing those 15 buses to King Williamstown. And the question that you asked about his killing and the banning of the organizations, you know, the BPC was engaged in a number of activities. Drake should know I was with him. He was leading our delegation when we were told by a progressive chief in Kudumani, Khosi Toto, that they want to detain us. Now this comes to the balkanization that he talked about. For the campaign that we had embarked on of going around the country campaigning against the independence of Bophuthatswana. We expected to be detained, but in the process, Biko died. They murdered him. I believe that they couldn't take it. The pressure was too much on them. And they just decided that the best thing that we can do is to outlaw these organizations. They did that when they rounded us up on the 19th of October. But those who were there will remember that, in fact, the detention orders were signed on the 12th of October, 1977. And a week later, we were rounded up. I think that's all that I wish to say. It was quite a moment, quite a loss. Thank you.
Thanks, Putseng. That was a mouthful there, and it is great that we have these stalwarts who were there, at the time of Biko, and who received the news of Biko's death. And I think it's important that we reflect back and we hear from them how they felt then and how do they feel now, 43 years later, having been participants at, the preparations towards Biko's funeral. It must have been a very heavy load on them to mobilize the nation towards the burial of Biko. And I think, over the years, they may have been reflecting on this and reflecting on the fact that, in as much as Biko said, his death could itself be a politicizing thing, that they managed to allow his ideas and his views to live on for so many years speaks volumes about, the man himself. Because life has been commemorated by the Black Consciousness Movement and AZAPO for all these years since 1977 without fail. And we have, heard, the movement talking about his ideas, talking about the life that he lived. And yet this man was really in his 20s when he developed, these ideas. And I don't know, what do you think of the man himself? A man, in his 20s, I mean, he was, the president of the PPC, if I'm not mistaken, at some point at the age of 25. And he was a man who was so revered and so respected, in this nation. And his ideas continue to reverberate across the world as a revolutionary idea that can, liberate a nation. And what do you make of him as a person, as young as he was, working along with yourselves in his ability to, put words in a manner that can move a nation towards action?
Yeah, as I said before, I mean, Biko was an extraordinary person, highly intelligent. He was always thinking, even on his feet. It's the reverence that we had for Biko, he just showed the kind of person he was. I mean, he had his own faults like any other human being. But when it came to us in the movement, here was a true leader, what we today call a servant leader, a man who was, leading and prepared to serve us. He was prepared to listen not only. He was not only the one who gives demands or speaks, but he was listening, a good listener for that matter. And Biko could easily make friends. He was so friendly. And even in meetings, so observant was he, that he will try and involve all people who are attending. He would say, Drake, what do you have to say on this? And so forth. Just showing the kind of leadership he had. And this is the man that bit later on, we felt that he should become an honorary president. The reverence that we had for him and the respect and the love that we had for him as a person and a friend and a leader of the movement. And Steve Biko was that kind of person. You know, there was never a dull moment for Steve. He could be jocular, you could, you know, we had so many Goombas in those times, and you know, it was spectacular. That and Steve was always in the mood for dancing and shouting and doing that. You know, that's the kind of person he was, an outgoing person. So that is the man that we buried on the 21st of September 1977. A real human being who had a human face. For, you know, yes, that's
Thank you very much. I can see, you know, you know, it may be feeling like yesterday, and yet it is 43 years ago. You know, when I look at you and I can see the expressions and the feelings, you know, it has all come back, I suppose. And yet, you know, it is so many years ago, and it speaks to, you know, the capacity of the man to, you know, to develop ideals, you know, that would liberate a nation. I'm not too sure what you would say to the young of today when they reflect on the country now, when they reflect on the kind of things that you spoke about, you know, the corruption and, you know, the rot that has visited our country. What should we be saying to them, and what should we be doing to ensure that Biko continues to liberate them? What can we be doing to catalyze the process towards, you know, that which Biko defined, you know, as, you know, that quest for true humanity that you spoke about?
yeah. Yeah, as I said, I mean, you know, um, despicable things that are happening in our society are actually because sometimes of our silence, other times because also we contribute towards it through our voting for the wrong persons or people. I mean, the young people for today, they should think back of where struggle comes from and how people suffered for this country to be free. And you know that we need more committed people, people who know, who love not only their country but love the people. People, we need, you know, we talked about putting people first. If there was a time of putting people first, but appealing, it is time now. We need that because that has been destroyed. Uh, People are putting themselves first more than the people they are supposed to serve. And I think that if we can instill that in the young minds of our young leaders to put people first, to be committed and to become, you know, in their leadership, true leadership should not aspire for recognition and so forth, but rather as Biko, because Biko didn't aspire for all those things. He didn't want to be recognized. It was its ideas that made him great. And we need to develop new, perhaps, ideas that will stick in people's minds, ideas that people will be able to recognize and say to themselves, here we see a brighter future for our country and for ourselves with this kind of idea. You know, that's the kind of youth that we should develop. Thinking the future, of course, they should not forget about the past. And building the future, the past should always be included because that is the foundation. And it should love in them, saying that as we grow towards the past, the future, in the past, we value what our forefathers did for this country, and we shall continue in that spirit. Okay.
Thank you very much, Drake Tshenkeng. And thank you for spending the afternoon with us, reflecting on the death. Sometimes we tend to reflect more on the life, but today we are really reflecting on the death of Biko and how you, as the leadership of the Black People's Convention at the time, received the news, reflected and prepared for his burial. And it was great to listen to your reflections. As we say on this online political education platform, we educate for liberation, and we believe that the views and the ideas and the reflections that you shared with us today will continue to educate our nation towards our continued struggle for liberation. And thank you for spending the time with us this afternoon. Next week, we are continuing with this program. We have officially closed off on the Biko commemoration series, the Biko month. We are getting into another gear where we would be focusing on other aspects of our lives. Next week, we will be talking about women in liberation and focusing on, the issues of women in struggle beyond the narrative of the gender-based violence. We'll be having young women talking about, women in struggle. So I look forward to that engagement with all of you. And for now, thank you very much. And until we meet again at this time next week. Thank you, Tshenkeng, and thank you very much to everybody who connected.
Thank you, Superior. Thank you for having me.
Masisi